when we really start looking at it, it's pretty staggering, because if you look at the current value of global ecosystem services as recognized by the international system, the world banking systems and the monetary systems, they have estimated a total global ecosystem services value in 2011 to be $125 trillion. Now, if you look down here at this table here, you will see that the terrestrial ecosystem, grasses, rangelands, boreal forests, lakes, rivers, croplands, etc., actually contributes to the largest proportion of the ecosystem services. And this is because ecosystem services has been looked at as flow value across a hectare per year. That is the services provided. But the problem that has arisen at the moment in the world is the interpretation of what ecosystem services are. And this has mired us actually in almost a Tower of Babel. If you look at this, the current definitions of ecosystem services are subjective. They are hard to measure. Yes, ecosystem services are benefits people obtain from ecosystems. And then UNDP goes on to say lots of services, but subjective in nature. Everybody else has got into this and created all kinds of what they feel is an ecosystem service without any real ability to measure. So if we are trying to place value on anything, ecosystem services in this case, there must be some methodology by which we can measure and evaluate. And I submit, and what we have been working on so far is that the fact that all ecosystem services begin through the actions of a very specialized component of its biomass, the photosynthetic biomass. It is this material that binds solar energy into long-lived usable forms that powers much of the activity of life. This is called primary productivity. Now, primary productivity basically is the creation of living matter or the creation of biomass. It happens when light energy is absorbed by various organic compounds such as chlorophyll to conduct the process of photosynthesis. In short, it is the combination of carbon dioxide and water with sunlight. They capture the sunlight to create a sugar, which goes on to power all the ecosystems thereon and produce oxygen. And some people have called this the creation formula. It's the way that life is created on this planet. Now, if you look at it, primary productivity is what powers all living systems. There's the producers first, there's the primary consumers, secondary consumers, tertiary consumers, etc. Same thing in ecosystems and ecological services. There is the primary service, which is the first service. In terrestrial systems, the primary productivity happens in the leaves of plants where chlorophyll is contained. And the photosynthetic biomass, this is what creates primary ecosystem services, which is, as we discussed before, carbon dioxide and water and sunlight to give us simple sugars and oxygen. Now, as it is the leaves of plants that deliver primary ecosystem services, the services of oxygen production, the services of energy capture, carbon capture, they are the most logical proxy to measure photosynthetic biomass by the existing photosynthetic biomass on any given area of land. Now, the growth and the accumulation of this photosynthetic biomass component, the leaves, in anthropogenic sort of situations is responses is a response to serial succession. All of you who have studied analog forestry know this figure, and they know the early serial stage is annual production. We add a few trees and plants onto it. Then we make it more perennial and agroforestry, bushes and shrubs, even more complex, adds complexity, and analog forestry, the vines, epiphytes, and the smaller plants, it adds much more concordance with the design of the original forest. But what you will notice is, as the maturity increases and as the complexity increases, the amount of photosynthetic biomass also increases. So the amount of primary ecosystem services produced increases, so that from annual agriculture to an analog forest, there is a demonstrable increase in primary ecosystem services. But globally, there is a loss. There's a loss of atmospheric oxygen. Even though we say the leaves are putting it back, we are taking more from the global commons than we put back. While carbon dioxide, the measures of carbon dioxide over from 1989 to 2013 has been growing up, the oxygen concentration in our atmosphere is coming down. And if you look at what is creating this impact on the oxygen in our atmosphere, we find that is basically fossil fuel, the burning of fossil fuel. This large purple area here is the burning of fossil fuel. And from the 1900s to 2100, the estimate is it's going to be massive. Just merely, not the carbon, just merely the use, the burning of the free oxygen that is in our atmosphere. So unfortunately, unfortunately, the burning of fossil fuel or agriculture that is powered by fossil fuel or any other process, urbanization that's dependent on fossil fuel, directly leads to the consumption of free molecular oxygen without replacement under the current economy. And we are told that carbon neutrality by tree planting will just soak up the carbon in the people who are burning the fossil tell us, oh, plant trees, it'll be all right. No, it is just as they do in finances, it is just the laundering of carbon. Because if you notice, if you take the fossil carbon from the ground, burn it, then say, oh, we're going to put it into a tree. We put it into a tree. The tree lives for how long? 100, 200, 300, 1,000 years. But when the tree dies, the carbon dioxide goes here. It doesn't go here. And the carbon that was here is 200 million years old. So unless we lock it up for 200 million years, there is no way you can have carbon neutrality by a process of locking it up using biological systems. There's another problem. The total worldwide oil consumption was about 93 million barrels per day. And the use of oxygen to burn this is about 39 million tons, 26 million tons of oxygen per day is used to burn the fossil energy that we use every day. And this is approximately the oxygen output of 221 million trees working over 1 year. And this is just a daily consumption of fossil fuel. So it's obvious now that carbon neutrality and locking up carbon is impossible. But what we can do is think about replacing the oxygen that we are burning in the process. But now carbon laundering into the atmosphere, of course, has done something that we are all very aware of, increasing the ambient temperature. Now, for all of us who work in trees and plants, we should understand that as the temperature increases to the optimal temperature of the enzyme chlorophyll, 37 to 38 degrees, it begins to denature. And there's a steady decrease in photosynthesis reactions until in the upper 40s, most of that becomes destroyed and the plant itself then dies. So this means that in the future to come, food production is going to be hugely compromised by the rise in temperature. Unfortunately, even at this last COP, nobody has addressed this very obvious crisis staring at us right in our face. What can we do? One of the things that we could think about doing in doing analog forestry or being analogous to natural systems is look at vegetational cooling. Transpiration by trees, one large tree gives you about 1,200,000 British thermal units a day of cooling. So if trees are then placed in a strategic manner, there is a temperature decrease in areas of almost 3 degrees that could be gained. And that could be the difference between having food and starvation. The future has to be designed. What are the design considerations of the future for agriculture? Can industrial agriculture continue to feed the future? Consider, as the temperature goes up, when it reaches 40 degrees and beyond 40, industrial rice production, like in this farm, is over. The plants will be dead. But in traditional rice production landscapes in this manner, the trees are constantly providing a cooling factor, plus is breaking up the airflow. There is no lamellar flow straight across the landscape. And this gives a much better landscape for the production of food. And unless we think about designing such landscapes analogous to these forest landscapes, food production is going to be greatly compromised in the future to come. Now, when we start looking at trees, we have to also look at the depths that the trees extend their roots into. Because as you see, as the tree root decreases in quantity, then the amount of microorganisms that live in the soil also decrease. The fact is, all microorganisms in the soil are kept alive and fed by root exudates and output from plants that grow above it. Now, providing a diverse vegetation that we call for not only provides biomass for composting, etc., it also facilitates the growth of living roots and soil. Tree roots, as we said, provides up to 20 to 30% of their total root weight as exudates into the soil. Every year, trees put almost 20% of their total root weight into the soil. Why? To feed the soil and create a robust soil ecosystem around the roots so that the trees can be sustainable. This aspect of this relationship between trees and soils still has to be recognized by most people working in this arena, and the sooner we do that, the better, I reckon, because a living soil is the most specious ecosystem on Earth. And a great many of these organisms in the soil have not yet been described. We talk about biodiversity. The biodiversity in the soil in a farm is almost greater than the biodiversity of a rainforest of the large organisms. And just in the mass, this is but how much organisms are present just in 1 gram of soil. 1 billion individual bacterial cells, 100 to 200 million individual actinomycetes, a kilometer length of fungal hyphae, etc., etc. All this are present in 1 gram of soil. Now, this accounts for a large biomass. Allison, in 73, suggests that the mass, just the bacteria alone in the upper 15 centimeters of soil is about 500 to about 1100 kilograms of living material per hectare. Now, this living material is critical and important us to consider because with climate change coming up, raindrops will become larger, the velocity will become higher, the impact surface area is going to become stronger, and unless the soil is covered, the erosion is a fact. Here is a picture recently in Sri Lanka of heavy erosive rainfall. And what it does is just tears and removes all the microorganisms, that living soil we spoke about. But if there are roots here, the roots again feed organisms and they build a new crust in this manner over the soil to heal the soil and start building it again. Soil crust then represents like a living skin that can rapidly heal erosive damage and exposure through sporadic high velocity rainfall events, which is going to be a fact in the future to come. And understanding the relationship between certain trees and their ability to create soil crust is also going to be a very important area for all of you who are doing analog forestry. Now, finally, all ecosystem services then, as we saw, begin with primary productivity and the generation of primary ecosystem services. On land, this is done through the leaves of plants. Now, it is because the leaves of plants do this, is it possible for the timber to happen and for the roots to put their exudates and for the soil to stay alive. Currently, leaves provide a surface area about 4.3 times the surface area of land on this planet. But this has been lost at an exponential rate. And frighteningly, the area that we have to support this leaf mass is less than 10% of the surface area of the planet, because it's only 10% of the surface area of the planet that have soils with the capacity that can sustain plants above it. So there's an urgent need to recognize the value of living photosynthetic biomass. So under the current, look at this picture here. Under the current economy, only the fruit has value, and only after it's plucked and sent to market. Under the proposed economy, the leaves too will have value, but only as long as it is living. Because a leaf on a tree can maintain photosynthetic biomass as long as it is carrying out the activity of photosynthesis. Pluck that leaf, the activity ceases, so does the value. We're calling for a new economic paradigm that will, for a first time, begin to put a value on life. Now, stepping into this new paradigm is our company Lifeforce. And presenters after me will demonstrate both the way that we pay back and value the farmers and the guardians of the tree, as well as building biodiversity with a B2B ratio, which is a part of the business model of Earthrestoration. Now, we require a set of actions to face the challenges before us. We have to understand the fact that anthropogenic land where human beings are currently living on today, will never go back to the natural state that it was once. We must understand the fact that human society will require the ecosystem services of a forest or high biomass ecosystems to maintain sustainability. And we need to create an anthropogenic or human response that respects the design and functions of a forest but serves society. We need to reinforce our farms to withstand the oncoming changes with climate change. We can do these things by appreciating the fact that the primary driver of ecosystem regeneration is photosynthetic biomass, and the primary value is the primary ecosystem services. And in just 4 simple words, the whole concept can be summed up in the statement, value the living leaf. Thank you very much. I will now hand over to the others who will demonstrate the technical and technological advances and scientific advances we have made in order to make valuation of primary ecosystem services a reality. Thank you.
Great. Hang on one moment.
Yes, I will.
Yeah. Thanks, Dr. Ranil. Thank you, Dr. Ranil. That was really informative, and that really lays the direction, lays the foundations and the direction that we are and we have been strategically moving towards. There was one question I had to ask Dr. Ryan just before we move on, and I introduce the session to everybody as well as orient people with the agenda. Have you heard the term necromass?
Yes, I have heard. Necromass basically is biomass.
You're still on mute on your computer.
Yeah. Necromass basically is biomass that is not alive, that is not active. That's necromass.
So does that include like the radial wood, everything, and the soil below?
No. See, the ramial wood at the moment is dead, but it has the term necromass has to be divided into 2 categories.
Right.
One is active necromass and the other is inactive necromass. For instance, in a thing like a peat bog, right, there is a lot of inactive necromass because there's no bacterial activity. It's not feeding any bacteria. So it settles down. The tundra is the same thing, right? In a rainforest, in a bog in a rainforest is different because it's rapidly, the temperatures are warm, it's rapidly turning over. So it's active necromass, or necromass that can feed an active ecosystem. Yeah. Yeah. So just necromass by itself doesn't say much except saying it's dead